Good afternoon and good evening for those who are on the other side of the globe. We're here today beginning the online conference, Animals in the American Popular Imagination. We are very grateful for all the great proposals we have received, and we've got a great program ahead. This is session 1 of the conference of Tuesday, panel A, which is titled Animals in the Apocalyptic and Speculative Fiction. Today we have three great talks ahead. And before I introduce our speakers, let me go very quickly through the instructions. You may have read elsewhere, this is being recorded and it will be later uploaded onto our YouTube channel. So if everyone's not comfortable with that and wants to ask a question, you can turn off your camera and just use the chat. So the procedure will be as follows. We have the 3 talks first. I'll introduce the speakers just before the talks, and we can leave the questions for the 3 speakers at the end. You can use these tools that you have at the bottom of the screen to raise your hands in case you have any questions, or you can use the chat or just ideally turn on your camera. But as I said, if you don't want to appear on the recording, you can just talk on the chat. And I don't know if I've forgotten anything. Maximum, please bear in mind that 15 minutes is the approximate time of your talks. And well, we shall begin. The first speaker is Lucy Neal from the University of Liverpool, and her talk is titled American Speculative Science Fiction, Making Room for the Non-Human Animal. The floor is yours, Lucy.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, and thank you for having me here today. So I'll just get my presentation up. Please let me know if you can't see it. But I'm guessing that we can. Okay. Oh, sorry. There we go. Sorry. Okay. So as we know, my paper is titled Making Room for the Non-Human Animal, and I will be looking at one particular piece of American fiction to consider this. So in this paper, I shall discuss how The People of the Sand and Slag by Paolo Bacigalupi acts as a warning about anthropocentrism. And the story casts a light on the importance of acknowledging the effects of slow violence and our damaging impact on the planet, as well as how when we use certain non-human animals within speculative fiction, it can force us to confront our treatment of non-human animals in the natural world. So the example we'll be looking at today is a dog. So Bacigalupi's short story allows us to consider humanity's relationships with the natural world in a new light. And in this light, it might be in a way that we don't want to acknowledge, but today I'm going to make us think about these things. So this short story has a novum called Weevil Tech, which is a form of biogenetic modification that allows the user, which could be human or non-human, to survive in the harsh topography, the poisonous air, and with the strict limitations of food and other essential resources which plague this future world. So the user becomes essentially immortal. All of those who have survived in this dystopian setting have been exposed to Weevil Tech, which has had a direct impact on day-to-day life. The characters we meet in this story, Chen, Jack, and Lisa, are colleagues. They share a job, a living space, bunk beds, and more intimately, each other's bodies. They all inhabit a security bunker at their employer's mining facility in a far distant future in Montana. They have biologically technologized and augmented themselves, almost unidentifiable as what we might recognize as being human. They inhabit a futuristic wasteland where technology dominates the natural world and unmodified non-human animals are rare and mostly live in zoos. One day when they are working, they find an organic, unmodified dog living in the acid pits. This discovery exposes much about their society as well as our own. So this story thrives on contemporary fears about what is happening to the environment, concerns about the longevity of mortal life, as well as human relationships with non-human animals. Whilst this story is often associated with the era of cyberpunk and its common traditional characteristics, such as the clear preoccupation of the impact of technology, The people of the sand and slag sits more comfortably with subgenres such as enviropunk or biopunk. Biopunk as a subgenre is mainly known through Jeff Puncher's science fiction dictionary, Brave New Words, and Lars Schmitt's biopunk dystopias. Defined by Puncher, the term biopunk is etymologically a derivative of the words biology and cyberpunk to refer to a subgenre of science fiction, which explores the societal effects of biotechnology and genetic engineering, with its heritage in cyberpunk. Whilst one might connect Bacigalupi with cyberpunk, connecting his work with biopunk situates his work with themes such as technologization, genetic engineering, as well as climate change. So Bacigalupi's opening lines are a collage of militaristic language, like what we see on the screen. And this situates the story as something aggressive and militarized. By their own admission, the group was expected to drop nukes on intruders of the mining facilities and then slag the leftovers so that they melt and the intruder cannot regrow. The lives of the characters consist of surveillance, response, and attack, expecting nothing but violence and hostility in return. As the story progresses, we are drip-fed images of the hostile world outside of the group's security bunker, being described as damaged, toxic, and uninhabitable. So if we look at the first quote on the slide here, outside the security bunker, the mining robots rumbled back and forth, ripping deeper into the earth, turning it into a mush of tailings and rock acid that they left in exposed ponds. This description emphasizes how abused the earth is and shines a light on how the earth is ripped apart for human consumption and need. The descriptions throughout this novel do not explicitly state that the world is damaged or exploited. We glean this information from context and construct that assumption ourselves. The characters do not view these dangerous sounding surroundings as anything negative, but rather view them as something comforting and beautiful, associating the acid pits with a place of safety or home. Christy Tidwell mentions this in her paper, The Problem of Materiality in Bacigalupi's work, pointing out how the language within the text infers a beauty in pollution, rather than highlighting the death and toxicity listed throughout. Tidwell suggests that Bacigalupi's characters do not see toxicity in pollution as negative, but rather move beyond the idea of beauty as natural and pure and towards pollution as representative of beauty. Tidwell's thoughts make the most impact when reading the description of the character's vacation on the beach. The beach is initially described almost romantically as a good place to walk along, holding hands, while black waves crashed on the sand. The beach and ocean are described with a really unusual aesthetic, combining the pollution of the world with beautiful imagery, such as when Lisa goes for a swim. She flashed through the ocean's metallic sheen like an eel out of history, and when she resurfaced, her naked body glistened with hundreds of iridescent petroleum jewels. Tidwell points out that the language here is normally associated with something natural or pure, such as eel or jewel, but has been instead tied to representations of pollution. Tidwell suggests that these strangely beautiful scenes reveal just how damaged the world is and how damaged and changed the characters must be able to enjoy it. In contemporary reality, popular holiday destinations are often regarded as beautiful due to the good weather, blue seas, and the beaches with dusky golden sands. Within Bacigalupi's text, the characters don't look for these qualities because why would they? For them, the toxic topography, the flammable waves of their polluted oceans, and the plethora of hazardous materials everywhere would be normative. In this short story, Bacigalupi is offering us a new perspective, revealing these distressing differences that we might have in the future if things don't change now. Contemporary subjective concepts of natural beauty and purity do not exist in this text in the same way, because they've not experienced them in the way that we have, and they no longer exist. This does not necessarily mean, as Tidwell suggests, that Bacigalupi's character's perception of beauty and nature is damaged or problematic. As beauty is subjective to the eye of the beholder anyway, here Bacigalupi uses this difference in perception to highlight how changed and damaged the world might end up being, not necessarily how damaged the inhabitants might end up being. So Bacigalupi explains that rather than being inspired by cyberpunk science fiction, he was originally inspired by a feral dog that lived in toxic waste and somehow managed to survive. This inspiration led to the emergence of the story The People of the Sand and Slag and the inclusion of a dog in the narrative. The introduction of the dog to the characters is significant. not only due to the initial inspiration for the story, but due to their undeniable impact on human lives, having long occupied a unique niche within human society and the broader world. Representations of human-dog relationships in literature are familiar and nostalgic, and this story is dependent on the emotional response that is engendered by the presence of dogs within life, society, across cultures, as well as within literature. Dogs have been our furry co-stars in the world for millennia, and this reflects in all areas of life, fulfilling roles as friends, family, fighters, or regrettably sometimes even as food. Dogs are a historically irremovable symbol of co-evolution and companionship that one simply cannot ignore. Our reading of Bacigalupi's text would be very different if he had chosen to introduce any other animal into this narrative. As Chrissy Tidwell states, if the animal the team had found had been a rat or a snake or a bear, nearly any other animal, the emotional impact would have been quite different. The dog has become a symbol not only of friendship and companionship, but also of a world where humans and non-human animals can live together. As Donna Haraway states, dogs have played a huge role in our society, history, and culture, here not just to think with, but here to live with, partners in the crime of human evolution. When the group in the text first discovered the dog in the acid pits, they approach it with caution, only expecting hostility. They question what it is. Is it some kind of biojob, they ask? The group notice that the dog has paws and asks what kind of sick bastard makes a biojob without hands, because in their eyes, if a creature doesn't have hands, it is useless. As the group has had very little experience with non-modified, non-human animals outside of the zoo, they do not consider the dog to be real at first, although there are no obvious signs that the creature has been modified or designed in any way. Tidwell states that Bacigalupi seems to have represented aspects of the natural world as nothing more than a tool for humanity to use, and this can be supported when considering the character's reaction to the dog. Lisa quickly asks, do you think we can make any money out of this? Proving that the inhabitants of this world regard living beings as being of use or as an opportunity for extra income, asking what does it do and how much is it worth? Later on in the story, once the group have become trying to care for the dog, Chen reads a poem called Dead Man by Yearly, who has been nicknamed our last immortal poet. The poem itself appears to be an ode to humanity pre-Weevil tech, pre-advanced technology. And this is mixed with Yearly's personal views of humanity's technological advancements. The poem reads, cut me, I won't bleed. Gas me, I won't breathe. Stab me, shoot me, slash me, smash me. I have swallowed science. I am God, alone. This poem tells the story of the alienation of humanity through scientific advancement, not only the loneliness of immortality, but also in accepting Weevil tech, or the next stage of technological human advancement. This gives humanity the ability to survive, but in doing so, animals are pushed to the fringes of humanity and begin to disappear altogether, whilst humanity continues to haunt the world, alone on a planet as everything around them either dies or vanishes. The penultimate line of the poem, I am God, echoes throughout the rest of the people of the Sand and Slag. Chen questions, if someone came from the past, would they even call us human? To which Lisa responds, no, they'd call us gods. Not only does this indicate an acceptance and acknowledgement of how much they have changed, it also shows a particular superiority they believe they have obtained. By calling themselves gods, as well as boasting that they have transcended the animal kingdom, they willingly put themselves above anyone and anything that came before or after, and this includes the natural world. Swallowing science leads to a potential or perhaps continued superiority over the natural world, leading to a lonely status, what is left of humanity. The future humans in Paolo Bacigalupi's world have had limited experience of animals, and even the introduction of a dog, an animal that carries such powerful emotions, the characters fail to connect with it and ultimately decide to eat it rather than accept responsibility. The short story ends with Chen feeling nostalgic. Still, I remember when the dog licked my face and hauled its shaggy bulk onto my bed, and I remember its warm breathing beside me, and sometimes I miss it. And yes, it might be really simple for us to just say, oh, well, Chen misses the dog, but I believe there's more to be derived here. As the group failed to establish a connection with the dog, it seems that as well as a symbol of companionship and of a world where humans and animals can live together, the dog has become a symbol of the collective past humanity. In eating the dog, the group have embraced technology and devoured the natural world, literally. As Haraway states that generally speaking, one does not eat one's companion animals, in eating the dog, the group rejects the possibility of any relationship or coexistence with the natural world. In this, Bacigalupi emphasizes the dog's symbolic meaning. The group refer to the dog throughout the short story as a relic or a window into prehistory, an antique, and a reminder of what came before Weeviltech, and thus a reminder of conventional humanity and the vulnerability humans once had. Chen's final lines here imply that he is sad that he missed out on a relationship with the natural world. He fondly remembers sharing the bed with the dog, as anyone might fondly remember friendly encounters with dogs or other non-human animals. But in this memory, the dog means more than just being simply a dog. It also shows that he misses the only part of their life that was not hostile and violent, and the only thing that he remembers that reminds them even of their past. So the people of the Sand and Slag not only present a world that does not, but also cannot make room for animals. The key reason for this inability to accept animals appears to be in their inability to escape from human centrality. Whilst the dog carries a heavy impact on the group, like it would for us, and this group do try to make room for it in their lives, the dog is ultimately reduced to a symbol of human-animal relationships and the lost aspects of past humanity pre-technology, attributes of society and the natural world that we might lose if things don't change. The characters choose technology and human advancement, rejecting the possibility of anything further, devouring the dog and thus cutting themselves off from the natural world forever, putting themselves above any creature that has existed before Weeviltech, accepting that with technology, we will remain alone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy, for such a thought-provoking presentation. Got lots of questions in mind, but first let's listen to our next speaker. His name is Katrin Isabel Schmitt from the University of Konstanz, and her talk is titled Animals After the End, Questioning Anthropocentrism in Post-Apocalyptic Fiction. Sorry. So whenever you're ready, Katrin.
Yes, let me share. Thank you also for this introduction. Sorry, my technology wasn't working. So maybe I'll team up with the natural world instead, but now it is. Good. Okay, great. So now I also threw down all my papers. We're making this catastrophic indeed. So yeah, today I'll talk about animals after the end. So representations of animals in post-apocalyptic fiction and what they tell us. Okay, so nowadays, post-apocalyptic narratives have reached a peak of popularity. Such stories have a critical power as they, quote, put forward a total critique of any existing social order, unquote. By illustrating what vanishes and what remains, they open up a narrative space which allows for critical questioning of values and ethics. Importantly, apocalyptic narratives always pick up on the topics and anxieties of their time. As we have just heard, in the 21st century, an urgent concern is the destructive impact of humans on the environment. Hence, it is striking that while human survivors suffer in the post-apocalyptic landscapes, the non-human natural world offers new spaces for nature and animals to thrive. In this way, end narratives introduce perspectives outside of the anthropocentric value system, which Timothy Clark defines as, quote, any stance, perception, and conception that takes the human as center or norm, unquote. Such anthropocentric values are critically questioned in post-apocalyptic literature, because the genre decenters the dominant position of humanity and highlights the perspective of non-human entities, specifically animals. To investigate how the post-apocalyptic genre questions and transgresses boundaries between human and non-human entities, I will compare two exemplary works of the genre. For one, Peter Heller's novel The Dogsters and Margaret Atwood's acclaimed Mad Adams trilogy, consisting of the books Oryx and Crake, The Year of the Flood, and Mad Adam. While Heller focused on traditional animals, Atwood introduces genetically modified animals and the human-animal hybrids Krakers. I I will compare the two works by outlining depictions and characterizations of animals within the novels and by examining the relationship between humans and animals in the post-apocalyptic world. Concludingly, I will question if these post-apocalyptic works enable a re-evaluation of bioethical values and anthropocentric perspectives by exploring if former hierarchies between species have changed. The protagonist of The Dog Stars is Hig, who survived a flu that killed almost everyone else. His only companions are his dog Jasper and the eccentric survival expert Bangley. Heller's post-apocalyptic world is not only void of humans, but further, the natural world has been significantly damaged. However, not due to the flu, but because of pre-apocalyptic climate change. Hig mourns this development and nostalgically reminisces that the, quote, trout are gone, the elk, the tigers, the elephant, the suckers, unquote. The lack of commas in this first sentence underline Hig's emotional reaction and symbolize a list that could be endlessly continued. Further, it blurs all these individual animals into one collective entity, one that has gone extinct. They are neither assigned an individual nor an intrinsic worth. The animal's disappearance is only evaluated and yearned for from Hig's human perspective. This perspective is predominant throughout the novel. Although Hig respects and admires animals, he primarily perceives them as a commodity for survival. He is a passionate fisherman and stresses that, in quote, fishing I had all my life brought the best of myself, my attention and carefulness, my willingness to risk, and my love, unquote. For him, fishing is a meaningful ritual, one that entails affection and devotion. However, here he disregards that killing fish is a vital part of this hobby. While he always considered fishing trout a fair challenge, he looks down on other fish. He judges them for not putting on a fight, yet eventually admiring the carp for their stoicism. At first glance, Hig seems to be on par with the fish. He notices their individual character traits, praises their strength, and seeks worthy opponents. But their interactions are not based on equality and mutual rivalry. Instead, Hig is a predator. He is in a dominant position which he imposes on the animal world. Nevertheless, The Dog Stars outlines new beginnings independent of humanity too. The novel is set 9 years after the catastrophe, and although the effects of climate change cannot be reversed easily, nature heals and regrows. There are, quote, plenty of mice in the world, plenty of hawks, plenty of crows. In the winter, the trees are full of them. Who needs Christmas tree decorations, unquote. With humans gone, animals shape the post-apocalyptic space, therefore rendering the division between culture and nature ad absurdum. Hence, former cultural artifacts like Christmas decorations are not of significance anymore. The animal world has outlived the human world. In this vein, Hig predicts that life would come back. How was a mystery, unquote. This underlines that history has always been written by nature. Humans are neither the beginning nor the end of the story, but only one chapter. Still, it is the human observer that takes on the role of the prophet, looking into a future he cannot fully understand. It has become clear that the apocalypse in The Dog Stars challenges former hierarchies between species. Yet, the apocalyptic moment does not dissolve the binary dichotomy between humans and animals. But there is one relationship that investigates these boundaries, the one between Hig and his dog Jasper. Jasper is old, mostly deaf, and cannot hunt anymore. From a survival perspective, one that Bangley advocates for, keeping the dog is a waste of food. Yet, Jasper means everything to Hig, and he even calls him his little brother. Hig treats his dog like a human companion, tries to guess his opinions, and wants to make him proud. For him, Jasper crosses the threshold of humanity. In reverse, their relationship evokes animal-like behavior from Hig. He feeds the bodies of dead men to Jasper, which he justifies by stressing that he eats animal meat as well. Although he tries to distance himself from the deed, for example, by sealing the human meat in airtight buckets, he comes close to eating it as well. What matters, quote, what matters if it is he or I, we are the same, unquote. He claims that there are no differences between Jasper and him. This is in line with art critic John Berger's work, in which he argues that in relationships between owners and pets, both lose their autonomy, as depicted in this quote. Consequently, a close connection is established between the two. Still, the dividing lines between human and pet are clear-cut, which is also the case in the dog stars. The bond between Hick and Jasper is significantly shaped by the former, who the dog is dependent on. In conclusion, the status quo has not changed in the dog stars. Animals are primarily portrayed as relevant in relation to humans, either as food or as companions. Human-animal boundaries might be blurred with Hick's and Jasper's companionship, but they are still very much intact. Although the enduring and inherent power of animal life is stressed, this evaluation is made from a human viewpoint. Appropriately, in the end of the novel, there is a reformation of the nuclear family, beginning the human world with an anthropological perspective again. In Margaret Atwood's Madame trilogy, the approach is a different one. The story is set in a world in which a deadly virus, designed and spread by the scientist Craig, has killed most of humanity. Besides a few human survivors, the world is inhabited by genetically modified animals, and the post-human Quakers. While Oryx and Craig is told from the perspective of Snowman, The Year of the Flood offers the two female perspectives of Toby and Wren within the same time frame. The final book of the series, Mad Adam, takes off where the other two novels end, merges the narrative strands, and outlines how a new community of humans, Quakers, and transgenic animals is established. Like in Heller's novel, in Atwood's post-apocalyptic world, there are few human survivors. As the natural world is not affected by the catastrophe, Atwood's apocalypse appears to be just another step in the universal species extinction. Hence, Snowman remarks that Homo sapiens sapiens joins the long, long list. Humanity has lost its special status and went almost as extinct as many other species did in the pre-apocalyptic world. In this context, it is crucial that the deadly virus initiating the apocalyptic moment was spread by Craig on purpose. With the pre-apocalyptic world being massively overpopulated and all natural resources exploited, Craig's virus brings an end to destructive human behavior. After the catastrophe, nature, although damaged, begins to reclaim the space now devoid of humans. The animals and birds are thriving unchecked. In the trilogy, human-animal hierarchies are renegotiated too. Yet, in contrast to the dog stars, animals have been genetically altered in Atwood's work. Due to liberal handlings of science and a lack of official guidelines in the pre-apocalyptic world, scientists created many modified creatures. An example for this are woolwuchs, who combine genes of dogs and wolves. They look like regular dogs on the outside, and Snowman finds it, quote, hard to resist their ingratiating wriggles, their pitiful whining, unquote. However, as they are relentless killers, it, quote, hasn't taken much to reverse 50,000 years of man-cat interaction, unquote. In contrast to Jasper, Hick's best friend in the dog stars, they are not loyal companions, but dangerous enemies that roam the post-apocalyptic space freely. Nevertheless, Snowman perceives the woolwuchs as valuable commodity and contemplates that by chasing them away, he has let them go to waste. Contrary to the dog stars, the value of the woolwuchs is only measured on their usefulness for survival, not on the level of an emotional connection as a pet. The alteration of animals is taken even further with the transgenic pigoons. There are pigs with human neocortex tissue, as they were used to grow human organs in the post-apocalyptic and pre-apocalyptic times. This genetic modification has made them clever and cunning, resulting in a strong Pigun community in the post-apocalyptic world. From a moral viewpoint, this community is even more advanced than the one of the remaining humans. While the Piguns are team players that care for each other, humans, such as the violent paintballers, still fight one another. Although humans and Piguns are enemies in the post-apocalyptic space, towards the end of the trilogy, they team up to fight the paintballers together. The hierarchy in this team is unclear. Hence, one of the humans remarks, quote, "We're just the infantry as far as they're concerned, but they're the generals," unquote. The group succeeds in its mission, kills the shared enemy, and continues the friendship and interspecies cooperation. The post-human Quakers are also important members of this group, as they act as interpreters between humans and pigs, thereby laying the fundamental basis for all interactions. The Quakers represent an alternative, pluralistic existence to a formerly human-centered world. They are creatures designed with both human and animal genes. That is why they are perfectly adapted to the post-apocalyptic world and have a harmonious relationship to their surroundings. They, quote, "suggest the plurality of belonging and exemplify multiple connectivity of materiality," unquote, as argued by literary scholar Dunia Moore. The shift in narrative control underlines that humanity is not of primary importance in the new community. The story of life is now told by a multitude of voices, which are neither necessarily human nor interpreted by humans. Hence, one of the characters wonders when listening to the sound of birds, if they have noticed the quietness, if they are happy, but coming to the results that they have no idea if this actually is the case or not. In the Mad Adam trilogy, all human-animal boundaries are transgressed. As an alternative to human domination, Atwood outlines a model of interspecies interaction and collaboration. This is especially exemplified when a new generation of human-Quaker hybrid babies is born. In conclusion, I have shown that post-apocalyptic novels address a multitude of eco-critical themes, especially regarding animals. From a biocentric perspective, one which, quote, "affirms the intrinsic value of all natural life," unquote, the apocalyptic impact is a positive development. Non-human life forms no longer have to suffer under a hierarchy shaped by humans. Yet, works of the genre renegotiate such values in varying degrees. While in the Dark Stars, former hierarchies are questioned, but old dichotomies between humans and animals remain, the Mad Adam trilogy introduces an innovative new community built on a biocentric value system. Nevertheless, both post-apocalyptic works prompt readers to critically evaluate anthropocentric stances and to rethink their own positions. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to our discussion later on.
Thank you very much, Katrin, for such an interesting presentation. We'll leave the questions for the end. I'm sure there's plenty. It's time to welcome our third speaker today. His name is Joshua Bulleid, and he comes from Monash University in Melbourne. His talk for today is titled "The Sixth Extinction: Animal Empowerment Pandemics in Viral Science Fiction." So whenever you're ready, Joshua.
Yeah, hi, do you mind if I leave my video off? I dropped out a couple of times during the last presentation, so I'm trying to conserve bandwidth, and I hope that doesn't happen. Yes, I don't have a presentation, so you are just going to have to listen to me. But you can't see me, but I am Joshua Bulleid. I am a graduate of Monash University, and my research so far has primarily centered around engagements with vegetarianism and animal ethics in science fiction and utopian literature. I should have a book coming out next year called Vegetarianism and Science Fiction, which is based on my doctoral thesis, which traced the representations of vegetarianism and animal ethics from the beginning of the modern science fiction tradition in the works of English authors such as Mary Shelley and H.G. Wells, through to the American-dominated present, through authors including Philip K. Dick, Ursula K. Le Guin, Kim Stanley Robinson, and Margaret Atwood. And my main findings there were that up until the 1970s, depictions of vegetarianism were predominantly utopian, encouraging a move away from meat eating. But since the 1970s, utopian endorsements of vegetarianism are almost non-existent, or at best extremely compromised, and have been largely replaced by a neo-carnist idealization of Native American hunter-gathering practices, which predominantly stem from the North American environmentalist movement through authors like Atwood, Robertson, and Le Guin. So keeping that in mind, what I want to do here is look at engagements with animal ethics in predominantly American pandemic fictions, based on an article by one of my supervisors, the influential Australian science fiction critic Andrew Milner, who in his recent article, Viral Science Fiction, I think it's 5 Ideal Types is the subtitle there, which was published in the March edition of the Extrapolation Journal this year. He outlines 5 categories by which to broadly categorize pandemic fictions. And these aren't ideal categories, they're just ones that he's observed while he's been surveying things. So to quickly outline the 5 categories he comes up with, he says, by far the most widespread of the 5 variants seems to be the post-apocalyptic survivalist mode, which includes founding English science fiction works such as Mary Shelley's The Last Man and H.G. Wells's War of the Worlds, although I think that's a dubious inclusion. It's more of an inversion of a pandemic, but he includes it and I want to talk about it later. So it's there, as well as works by the American authors George Stewart with Earth Abides from 1949 and Richard Matheson's I Am Legend from 1954. And Canadian author Margaret Atwood's Mad Adam trilogy, which we've already heard a bit about, and also Canadian author Emily St. John Mandel's Station 11. He also says that you might include the 2011 American reboot of the Planet of the Apes, The Rise of the Planet of the Apes film, which does have an English director, but is from an American screenplay. I'm conscious that American was in the title of the conference, but no one else really seems to care. I would also add the 2002 British film 28 Days Later and its sequel, as well as more or less the entire zombie subgenre, of which it is a part. People say they're not zombies, they are zombies. So I think that is worth a mention. We'll come back to that. The other categories he outlines are time travel, which his primary examples there are Connie Willis's Doomsday Book from 1992, as well as the 1995 film 12 Monkeys, directed by Terry Gilliam, who is, of course, the only American-born author of Monty Python, member of Monty Python. And that film was also written by an American couple, David and Janet Peoples. And he also says that sort of fits in the post-apocalyptic mode as well. He also gives a single example of political allegory in Carol Kopech's play The White Disease from 1937, and also a single example of the techno thriller in Michael Crichton's Andromeda Strain, which I didn't write the year for, but I think it's early 50s. And he says there that these techno thrillers are less about pandemics, they're more about like escaped government science gone awry, right? The mystery about where did this strange new disease come from, which 12 Monkeys also fits into, and I would say, again, zombies. Especially things like the Return of the Living Dead series and the Resident Evil series. And I would also point out that the American director George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead, which is considered like the first of the modern zombie tradition, the virus in that film is implied to come from an outer space probe, which is the premise of the Andromeda Strain. So I think there's a pretty direct lineage there. Milner's final category that he seems most interested in is pandemic fictions that involve plausible science, to which he ascribes Willis's Doomsday Book, along with the 1995 American film Outbreak, American director Stephen Sondheim's 2011 film Contagion, as well as the American Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Lawrence Wright's 2020 novel The End of October. He also includes French philosopher Albert Camus' 1947 novel The Plague, which he spends the rest of his article arguing for as a work of SF, science fiction. And that seems to be his primary concern. That's what the bulk of his article is about. He doesn't really seem to do anything with these categories once he points them out, but I want to do something with them. And the first thing I want to do is I want to add a 6th category or subcategory of the animal empowerment pandemic, which is something that I've definitely observed. And this is fictions where there are pandemics that allow often interspecies communication that leads most often to the establishment of non-human civilizations, and the supplantation of human civilizations by interspecies or entirely non-human organizations. And this category I am primarily representing by two texts in the Canadian comic writer and artist Jeff Lemire's Sweet Tooth series from 2009 to 2013, which also had a 2021 American Netflix adaptation, which was advertised as a genuine pandemic on the cover of the American newspaper USA Today before it premiered. And Melbourne author Laura Jean McKay's celebrated 2020 novel, The Animals in That Country, which takes its name from Margaret Atwood's first poetry collection. We might also tentatively add the American cartoon series Keeper and the Age of Wonder Beasts, which I don't know anything about other than I think it is about a post-apocalyptic world where a virus has enabled animals to speak. So can't talk to that one, but that might be another example. Now, all of these sort of fit into that category of post-apocalyptic survivalism as well. So before I go looking at these animal empowerment examples, I do want to take a quick look at the engagement with animal ethics in Milner's post-apocalyptic examples before turning to my own. As Andrew, I'm going to call him Andrew rather than Milner, as Andrew observes, a key theme in these post-apocalyptic pandemics is, sorry, my cat has just jumped up and is demanding my attention. Yes, as Andrew observes, a key theme of these post-apocalyptic pandemic texts is the human incapacity in the face of nature. So going all the way back to The Last Man, we have a story that is the fall of a vegetarian utopia by a plague that is repeatedly described using carnivorous language and ends with scenes of nature overgrowing Rome while wild animals walk around it. So yes, the takeover of human civilization by non-human animals. You also have the War of the Worlds, which, as I mentioned, is more of an inversion rather than a continuation of the pandemic trope. But by the Martian invasion that happens in there forces a collapse of non-human and human binaries. There's a lot of reflection and things in that book about how the Martian treatment of humans is similar to the way humans treat other animals. That's a repeating thing throughout the text. And then, of course, the Martian invasion is headed off by bacteria, a bacterial infection. So that's where the inversion come in. It is a Martian pandemic, or a pandemic of the Martians rather than them bringing a pandemic here. The line there is that the Martian invaders were slain after all man's devices had failed by the humblest thing that God in his wisdom had put upon the earth. So even there in this ironic inversion, we have a flip of the humble creatures being raised above humans and achieving what they could not. But again, when we switch to the American tradition, this sort of flips. So in Earth Abides, which is about a plague that wipes out society and then it rebuilds into an idealized hunter-gatherer society. And throughout this book, we have a hammer that is the symbol of rebuilding the old world, gets used to hunt animals, and is eventually replaced by the bow and arrow, signaling a return to nature based on hunting rather than the ideal to rebuild the previous American civilization. Most obviously, I think, is 12 Monkeys, which is, yes, Andrew notes, also contains post-apocalyptic elements, but takes its name from the elusive animal activist group, the Army of the 12 Monkeys, led by the mentally unstable Geoffrey Goins, who are believed to have released a virus that wiped out 99% of the Earth's population and forced all human survivors underground so that once again animals would rule the world. At the end of the film, however, it is revealed that the 12 monkeys were merely responsible for releasing the animals from a Florida zoo and caging a virologist in their place. And that the man responsible for the viral outbreak turns out to be an alarmist environmentalist earlier introduced proselytizing about how the planet cannot survive excesses of the human race and their rape of the environment, and who carries a vial of the virus in a briefcase adorned with environmentalist propaganda. So the film's final position then seems to be that animal activists are simply harmless, mentally unstable goofballs, but it's the environmentalists you have to watch out for. Nevertheless, the monkeys are sympathetic to Peter's cause, calling for a human hunt and the human race, and proclaiming that the human race deserves to be wiped out after witnessing footage of laboratory experiments that he's leaked. Another major example that we've heard about today is Margaret Atwood's Mad Adam trilogy, which has been discussed. We have the mad scientist Craig partnering with the vegetarian environmentalist sect of God's Gardeners to release a virus that wipes out the human race so they can raise peaceful vegetarian post-humans in their place. And a lot of readings, including some of the ones we've had today, posit this as like the usher to push back against that reading a lot. I think in the same what do you call it, the same issue that Andrew's article that I'm talking about was published in. I think the next article is one about the Mad Adam trilogy and kinship with other animals. I have not read that because, of course, my library login only gives me access to everything but the most recent issue of the journal. So there might be something there, but my reading of the Mad Adam trilogy from an animal activist sort of perspective is that vegans and animal activists are frequently mocked or made to look naive. The God's Gardeners who make up the human survivors immediately give up their veggie vows within less than a week and usher new survivors in with plates of bacon. And they teach the post-human Quakers animal sacrifice rituals in order to make them more human. And then even when you have the Pagoon Pact at the end of the book, as we sort of discussed earlier, that is only with a species that has been genetically modified with human brain tissue to make them intelligent, whereas other animals, such as deer, are still considered all right to eat. So I don't know if that is changing relationships with other animals so much as redrawing the boundaries. The same sort of thing happens in Rise of the Planet of the Apes, where the virus that causes the apes to become intelligent and rebel comes from a laboratory chimp that is, well, 2 minutes left, you reckon? Okay. 2 minutes left. All right, let me smash through these examples then. Let's skip over all of those and we will go to the end of October. So the end of October talks about a prehistoric virus which is revealed to have been released from mammoth fossils that have been exposed by melting ice caps, making it sort of an example of climate fiction as well. But this is not until right at the end, after most of the novel spent tracking down a vegan scientist who became an animal activist due to his discomfort with animal testing, but is also ultimately revealed to be an eco-fascist accelerationist who has been helping the Russians genetically engineer a virus to wipe out America and the rest of humanity, sort of undercutting the idea of the environmentalist angle there. And this is also the one like in-depth nuanced example of an explicitly vegan character in science fiction that I can find, and he turns out to be, yes, a treacherous eco-fascist, so not a great spread there. I want to talk about Contagion, but I need to talk about Sweet Tooth and animals in that country. So Sweet Tooth, this is about, shares the same sort of thing. We have an ancient virus being unearthed by ice that melts and reveals a virus that is released from an Inuit burial ground. This causes all human children to become non-human hybrids that end up taking over the world. And the story follows the half-deer protagonist Gus, who begins the series as a pacifist vegetarian before being whipped into shape by his violent human companion Jeopard, and ends with him as a hyper-masculinized head of a hybrid hunter-gatherer society who have rituals where they thank the gods spread throughout the wider world, when a sympathetic science rescued Gus from the animal testing, making it all the animal activists' fault anyway. And I will wrap up by talking about the animals in that country very, very quickly, which is about a virus that allows for interspecies communication, but not by making non-human animals talk, but by enabling humans and other animals to be more receptive to already existing animal signals, such as those communicated through scent and physical postures and things. This is extremely complex, and I obviously don't have time to unpack it given that I got the 2-minute warning. I do have like almost 10,000 word long drafts analyzing both of these texts on my academia page if you want to track down that and go in depth on some of the things in these texts. There are a lot of animal activist conspiracy theories floating around in this book. They're made ambiguous, they're presented skeptically, but it is also implied that the virus may have been primarily spread by animal activists who, once they started hearing animals, started releasing them from captivity. We have a single, and I'm going to wrap up in the next 30 seconds, I swear. We have a vegetarian animal activist character, Lee, who is the son of the main protagonist and seems to be right about a lot of the things, but he is ultimately invalidated when he takes the protagonist's granddaughter to speak with the whales who are calling to him and other more sympathetic humans to return to the sea. And then he and the others are dragged under and drowned by the whales while the granddaughter is rescued. And most of the plot is about them tracking him down like he's the evil kidnapper. So I'm not really sure what to make of that. It seems like throughout the whole book he's right about everything, but then he takes the granddaughter to get killed by the whales. I'm not quite sure how to unpack it. But yeah, these post-apocalyptic pandemic fictions, which I didn't get to talk about all of, contain almost all the science fictional portrayals of animal activists that I've encountered. And they're all either villainous or morally compromised extremists. So this seems to be a trope. And as far as I know, there have not been any worldwide pandemics caused by animal activists releasing animals from captivity, whereas coronavirus did begin in the wet market and spread through slaughterhouses. So I didn't talk about it, but the film Contagion seems to be the only thing I found that grapples with this. And the prominence of these depictions also raises the question of whether there is the possibility of more mutual relationships with other animals without the need for an apocalyptic plague. Ask me in the questions for more information if you want. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Joshua, for very, very interesting talk. Before we go into the Q&A session, I would like to ask you, because I couldn't get all the names straight, if you could write on the chat all the works that you have mentioned. I'm sure a lot of people here would be interested in that. And without further ado, we've got around 20 minutes for a discussion with our speakers. So if anyone in the audience wants to start the discussion, ask a question, comment for any of the speakers or for all of them at the same time, you can use the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom tools. And you can either, I think Katrin's got a question. Yeah.
I'm actually allowed to ask you a question, Lucy. Yes, you. So you talked about that in this short story, pollution is depicted as something beautiful and not judged as something, bad. So I wondered, is there also a sense of blame for the world as it came to be? So, because I often feel like these catastrophic stories are some sort of a self-defeating prophecy. So we don't want to end things the way they are here. Do we also have this message in this short story, or how is it depicted there? How do you interpret that?
So there's a lot of different opinions on kind of the, why did Batchley write this story? What was his agenda? And his agenda was literally that he was inspired by this feral dog. So whatever we choose to decide, I think as long as you can find evidence for it, you can take that away. But for me, I don't think there's a sense of blame. I think it's more of like a gratitude. It's really bizarre. Like, I recommend that everybody read this story. It's really weird. But it's the sense of like gratitude for our thankfully we've got our science. It's like this attitude around science that, oh well, we've survived and that's all that matters. And almost viewing the backlash of our technological advancements and our abuse of the planet, almost viewing that as that this is proof at how great we are. Like, look at this greatness, we're just amazing. So true and pure anthropocentrism just thriving throughout this novel. And when I mentioned that the topography and the natural world that's been killed is described beautifully, it really is. It's got these amazing imagery, absolutely gorgeous. And then when you actually think about what he's actually describing, we would be quite distressed and concerned in those environments. But the people of the people of the sand and slag just think, oh well, we've got our science and this is the price of it, and this is great and we love this. And yeah, the sense of blame isn't there. It's just incredibly uncomfortable. But I'll put a link in the chat for anybody who wants to read it. You can read it online for free, so I'll do that now.
Thank you very much for that. Is there any other questions in the audience? You can either write them on the chat or just turn on your camera and your microphone. If there's not read the question yet, I have one for all of the speakers. I think all of you have mentioned climate change. I don't think Joshua has, but some sort of apocalypses and some sort of contemporary apocalypses. I don't know if make myself clear. I was thinking that in traditional science fiction, the premise is that some kind of technology has evolved to plausible but not yet reached level that we do not have nowadays, and the fiction reflects upon what the results could be, either very good for society or out of control and very bad. So maybe it's a reflection of the anxieties of the growing technology that we have around us, where it might end. But I see in all of your works that there's a changing trend that is our world is currently very, very damaged. Everything's very bleak. And I was thinking if these kind of novels and short stories, there is a change in that the anxiety is not about the technology, but about our situation. It's every day on the news, and there's either technology or biotechnologies, desperate attempt to cling on some kind of hope that technology and science might save us, or the other way around, as like a reminder that technology industry has created this, and there is like the solution is a return to nature or something like that. I saw in all of the works you have mentioned that kind of tension between these two approaches. So I would love to hear a bit more about that.
Do you want me to start? Okay.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, go on.
I think it all really depends on the story. For example, what Lucy just said, well, you'll get more to that later, that they praise science. It's often not the case in post-apocalyptic fiction, because there we have this complete breakdown of civilized society. And yes, it is civilized. Like we talked about different perspectives and what is taken as norm. And so we don't have technology, and thereby often also judging technology to an extent. And as you can see, for example, in Atwood's Mid-Adam trilogy, praising the inherent power of nature, different systems, different approaches to ecology. But still, it's always alluded to that technology often also has a positive side, especially when it comes to communication and global networks and reaching each other. But I'd say it depends on the subgenre you're heading towards. So in post-apocalyptic fiction, I would argue technology is often depicted as the thing that is responsible for the catastrophe, but still people long for, but cannot be the solution, because then we would go into a cycle of destruction all over again.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Katrin. And I think what's kind of nice is that we've taken completely different kind of aspects. So you've got the kind of like post-apocalyptic, post-technology, almost, you know, after people kind of literature going on there, the last man narratives. And then I've looked at something where, you know, nature and animals have almost completely died out. But I think, yeah, you kind of made most of the points there, really. I think the only other thing to mention would possibly be that when we see these narratives where we see, you know, what comes after our technological advancements, and whilst that technology might be, as Mónica mentioned, you know, a hope or a cure or a way for us to survive, quite often these kind of dystopian narratives come out because it's that kind of contemporary anxiety and fear around technology, like with robots. We think, robots will replace the army, but inevitably they're going to overthrow the human race. But where does that anxiety come from? We have no proof of that. It's just something that we expect, and it's now become like an archetype of science fiction. So I think when we see these negative stories, or the negative after effects of technology in speculative fiction, it's almost fueled by our concern about what could happen next, and we very we invariably look at the negatives instead of the positives. Maybe because it makes it a better read, but that seems to be like the trend that I've come across. I don't know what Josh thinks about this, but I'll hand over to him.
I have lots of thoughts, and I'm not sure if they're answering the question, because I've a little bit forgot what the question is at this point. But this is moving towards like responses to these crises in science fiction, I guess. To incidentally promote Andrew's work again. These categories are sort of inspired by a book he put out, I think it was last year or the year before, called Climate Change in Science Fiction, which I think is really, really good and worth reading if you haven't already. But in that, he has a systematic categorization of all different climate fictions and categorizes them. Like, two of his categories are positive technological adaptation and negative adaptation, and he goes through all the different technological responses suggested. So if that is something you are interested in, that would be my first port of call. As far as these post-apocalyptic pandemic fictions, again, to full reference for the book, it is called Climate Change and Science Fiction. It is by Andrew Milner and J.R. Bergman, who I think is his son. I will put a link in when I'm done responding. What was I saying? Oh yes, so again, to appeal to Andrew, like when he's categorizing these pandemic fictions, he says, yeah, the post-apocalyptic mode is the most wide-ranging, but it also seems to have the least to do with actual pandemics, right? The pandemic is more just this novum, this cause to imagine this new social structure. And I guess the argument I'm making is that often it's not so much a cause for a new society as a way to reinforce the old one. I mean, that's sort of what I see in Atwood and a lot of these, is that it's getting back to the normal, right? You have these extremist animal activists on one side, you have like the savage post-apocalyptic setting that they're stuck in. And the resolution at the end of the book is really a re-establishment of a society that isn't far removed from our own, right? The Quakers don't offer a new future, they are made to resemble our present. So often I find them more conservative and reinforcing than suggesting positive futures in the modern mode. If that addresses the topic.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Before, I don't know if there's any other question, but I would just like to make a small remark about things that you've said, because I think one of the, obviously it depends on the work, and I'm very interested in reading all these categorizations. I think I've come across that book in the past, but I didn't remember the different, like the very kind of synthesizing categorization, which I'm interested in. But what I wanted to ask is that one of the things that you've all mentioned is that there is this trend that it is actually technology that's created. It's like technology is different, dangerous, sorry, and that has a lot in common with like more like 1950s, 60s, 70s science fiction. But I wanted there was something in at the beginning of your presentation, Lucy, that caught my eye. And is there in this case a big difference between post-apocalyptic, post-technology fiction, biopunk? Because I had not come across the term biopunk, and I'm very interested what's the big difference between like more science fiction novels and obviously post-apocalyptic. It's like after an apocalypse, so it's like obviously that's the difference. But I'm interested in seeing because when we think about biotechnology, maybe the connotations are more positive than with industry technology, and maybe I think there is a lot of hope in current society on biotechnology, genetic modification, etc. But I'm not familiar with any. Maybe the Madame trilogy could be classed as that, but I don't know if you have any more information for us.
Yeah, of course. I suppose I gave like the most kind of vague and tight kind of explanation of what where biopunk is because of the time constraints. So I'd say if anyone's really interested in kind of like biopunk dystopian fiction or biopunk narratives, I would take a little look at Lars Schmitt's biopunk dystopias. So he wrote a paper on it, I think it was in like 2016-ish, and he goes into a lot of depth as to what biopunk really deals with. So on the very surface, it deals with kind of biological change or biology. elements of the cyberpunk kind of genre, which is like moving away from new wave fiction and more into cyberpunk. So you know, elements of cyberpunk fiction come through as well, but then it also deals with political differences, sociology differences, aspects of post-humanism, which I'm sure everybody in this room has come across. So absolutely, I would say that Margaret Atwood's Madame Trilogy can be considered biopunk, because it deals so much with like xenotransplantation and biological genetic manipulation. And I'd say a lot of the texts even that have been mentioned by Josh as well, quite a few of them I've come across, and I thought, yeah, that would match quite well with what Could Be. But in terms of like kind of last man standing narratives, unless they do have that preoccupation with biological change or biological enhancement, I wouldn't call them biopunk, but feel free to disagree. So if it would just be like a last man stand narrative, like a zombie apocalypse that was caused by just some sort of disease, as opposed to like a biologically created disease. I know that Josh mentioned a few, but I maybe would avoid calling it biopunk, but then somebody else might come in and go, no, because it's a political statement, it is biopunk. So it covers so many different things. I think you need to read up on it. But yeah, I hope that helps and answered your question.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I'll definitely look into that. I was caught my eye with this term because I've not heard it before. Is there any of the
May I
speakers?
make a recommendation?
Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
In relation to biopunk, I mean, the place my head immediately went is like, yeah, we talk about Atwood and Baskerville being like biopunk is a new thing, like this biological turn in science fiction. There, I of course go, well, Frankenstein was biology, right? That's sort of, again, Mary Shelley did everything before everyone else. The punk isn't there. Where the punk comes in a Frankenstein style narrative, though, is the book He, She, and It by Marge Piercy. If people are aware of that, which is more or less a retelling of Frankenstein, except it is post-apocalyptic. It's not quite a Last Man thing, but it's a post-apocalyptic environmental dystopia about a robot who learns to have sex with old women. It's great. It's one of my favorite books. It's really incredible. It's called He, She, and It in the UK. I think everywhere else it's published as Body of Glass. Very influential critical book, but doesn't seem to have much of a popular presence. So I am recommending that book to everyone I can.
Good, thank you. Yeah.
I had a weird question for Katrin, but it's probably going to come out as word vomit. So I'm going to try. Obviously we're looking at Atwood. I'm not familiar with the other text, but I'm definitely going to read it because it sounds very me. But in Atwood, we're talking about obviously humans are kind of gone and animals are almost reclaiming the spaces. And for anyone who's read the series, it is very kind of like animal central, which is fantastic. But it kind of got me thinking about narratives that deal with de-extinction. So I know that Jurassic Park probably comes immediately to mind after Chrissy Tidwell's keynote, but in some of your narratives you come across these concepts of de-extinction, or potentially that, you know, humans have engendered animals to kind of come back to life, as it were, or to come out of extinction, or to take over. And it's a really vague question, but I was just wondering how that might fit in your research, if it makes sense.
It does make sense. It was quite a way to introduce the questions. Like, it might be weird. I was intrigued. You got me there. Good hook. Not really. It's not really the case in post-apocalyptic. So in the works I'm studying, not only Atwood, but generally these types of post-apocalyptic fiction, because people are so busy with surviving. So because the form of protection bestowed by societal frameworks is falling apart, and they're so busy with not only physically surviving, but also metaphysically. Who am I without society? Where do I fit in? Is there even a future without society? So they're so self-focused that they don't really have these transgressions. And Atwood is quite the exception. So there I would disagree with Josh, because I think she proposes new beginnings, innovative beginnings. So because in the end, people start to be vegetarians. We have these hybrids of animals and creatures that kind of suggest a new beginning, but not set in stone, because We don't know if they will be able to reproduce. So we have slight crossings of boundaries, not in all parks, like only in some of them. But yeah, as I said, humans are so occupied with themselves that they can't really put the energy they have left into other animals. But there might be some novels out there. If someone knows one of them, feel free to put them in the chat.
The end of October that I mentioned with the vegan scientist who's engineering viruses for the Russians. He is doing that because he's cloning animals to bring them back from extinction, and he has like a whole room full of extinct animals, and like the virus is like, is it another animal that he's cloning, right? What right does a virus have to live? It goes into that a little bit. So that is the immediate example that jumps to mind.
So which book was that? Did you put that in the...
It is called, I'll write it in the chat, it is the
Thank you.
End of October by someone Wright, Lawrence Wright, I think.
Because I know that they do that in the short story I've just mentioned, but obviously that's not a last man standing apocalypse. It's more the absolutely devastating future of humanity if we carry on, with very different kind of emotional, needs that are completely different to like the Madame trilogy. So yeah. But thank you for answering the question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for such a good discussion. If there is not any other, is there any last minute question from the audience? If there's not, I'd like to start wrapping up the session because we only have a couple of minutes left, and I would like to emphasize again that I'd really like to thank you for engaging in like such an interactive and interesting conversation at the end between the speakers, and thank you for your talks as well, for sticking to the allocated time, and for thanking and giving a virtual applause to our speakers. I would like to remind you that the next session starts in 15 minutes at 4:30 Spanish Peninsular time. Always say that, like it's Central European Summer Time. Yeah. We've got panel A, literature and non-human animal narratives, and panel B, anthropomorphism, empathy and animals in the popular imagination. Feel free to log in one of the rooms, the lounge, to have a chat to the other participants. I'll hopefully see you in one of the sessions. We have 3 more days and a few panels left of our wonderful conference ahead. So thank you very much for your participation and for listening to this panel.